Bhagwan, thank you for being part of this interview. We just finished our meditation seminar, weekend meditation. And so while it's still fresh, I always find that this is an appropriate time, to do an interview, to sort of go back into some of the questions and the things that came up for me at least. And, this time I was, it always happens to me when I'm in a meditation seminar. I'm flooded with all these creative ideas and thoughts and so forth. Maybe it's just the very act of sitting there. Whereas in my day-to-day life, I'm not really thinking that much at all, just in meditation seminars. But what really was useful to me was, I said, well, this is teachings in silence. That is how you position what we do. It's different than the idea of meditating with a mantra or a technique or following your breath or watching for stray thoughts. It's teachings in silence. And so when I was struggling with my flood of thoughts, I realized, the silence is always there in the background. And so I can just go there. And so maybe you could just speak a little bit about what that is, to turn to the silence when we're meditating, as opposed to technique.
Yeah, you say that the silence was there in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So at least you were conscious of that. And so that itself makes you free of the thoughts or pictures or feelings that were coming up. So that's a step in itself. That's the meditative state. When you're not in meditation, there'd be no awareness of the silence. You'd be totally lost in the thoughts or in the feelings, and they'd be carrying you away. And you'd have no freedom from them and no clarity. But because there was this background silence, it slows down your thoughts and feelings and gives you clarity about them. And that's the process of meditation.
But when you use the word silence,
Yeah.
You're not referring to physical silence.
No, not at all. So we are referring to not just the absence of noise and sound, but the slowing of thoughts, the stopping of thoughts, the absence of thoughts. But in this case, you say there were thoughts. Mm-hmm. There were thoughts. And so, but you were not going with the thought. There was a background of silence. The fact that you were aware of the background of silence implies that you were not going with the thoughts. Mm-hmm. If you were going with the thoughts, there'd be no awareness of the silence.
Karen, you had an experience too?
I think one of the most helpful things that I learned, I love this idea of teachings in silence. I learned another level of it at this seminar, and that actually as we're sort of grappling or asking the questions, who is distracted or who is in the mind, it does, through the silence, there is sort of insight that happens. And one of the things I saw this time was how sort of aggressive the mind is. That the energy of the mind is very aggressive, but when you turn the direction and ask who is experiencing this, there's no effort in it. That became, I know that sounds sort of maybe trite, but there was some kind of awareness about that this time.
Yeah, that's a good discovery that you made. And now it becomes a tool or a key for you to deal with difficult situations of the mind and outside too. But now, since you both asked about teachings in silence, can I say a few words about that?
Please.
Yeah. You see, the importance of teaching in silence is that in silence you can learn about yourself and the universe in a way that you cannot know through the mind.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot know through thinking and feeling and your imagination or sensations or any outer experience. You cannot understand the world or yourself in the profound way that you can through silence. And let me explain that. See, through the mind, in the mind, there's duality. There's you and the other. And so your experience of the world is an experience, a world of duality. And that is the cause of all conflict, that's the root of all conflict and all confusion and chaos in the world, in yourself and in the world. Silence is the only state in the universe that is non-dual. And non-dual is reality. Dual is a manifestation of reality. Now, I have to explain more. Why do we say, what's reality? Reality is something that's forever, infinite and forever. Manifestation is something that's always changing and is transient and temporary. The world is transient and temporary, so it's a manifestation, it's not reality. So you have to know your reality if you want to understand what the world is, what's the purpose of the world, what's going on in the world, how you're connected with the world, and so on. If you want to understand the confusion of the world, and even the history of the world, and the meaning of it all, you have to get into context. You have to bring reality, and in the context of that, you can understand it. So reality, or the non-dual state, which is silence, is an infinite state beyond time and beyond space, which means it's an eternal infinite state. And it's a state of consciousness. It has understanding, it has power, the power to manifest, it has creativity, and 100 other qualities. So, without knowing this, without knowing the non-dual state, the dual state of the world, which is the world, cannot have meaning. Because it will only bring confusion, because it's not the truth. It's a manifestation. And so we live in confusion, and that's the state of the world. There's confusion all the time.
So what makes manifestation so limiting? Why would that be a...
Yeah, manifestation is limiting because it's measurable. It's in time and space. So it's limited in time. For example, the manifestation of your body is for perhaps 100 years, not more. It's limiting. And the rest of the world too, anything that's measurable is limiting. So time and space are measurable and are limiting. Silence is the only infinite state.
So, Karen, you brought up this question of the mind being very aggressive, almost propulsive.
Propulsive, yeah.
And so, what gives the mind that power?
That's a good question. Yeah. I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Yeah, what gives the mind that power? Well, your attraction to what you're thinking and perceiving and experiencing, the attraction of the outer world gives the mind that power.
Yeah, it makes sense because I was sharing in the seminar today how I didn't sleep very well last night, and I'm in this process that I have a new group of students that are coming in a few weeks. We're going on vacation, and I have all this big list of things I have to do, and so the sort of the thoughts kept coming. Okay, you need to do this, 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 and this, and it was very aggressive. It was a very aggressive feeling. But as soon as I turned my attention, it was almost completely the opposite. How I
That's a
felt.
wonderful discovery.
Yeah, it
because
is.
if the mind's pulling you out, the mind's controlling you. You have no freedom.
Yeah.
And the moment you can turn inwards, as you say with the question, who's experiencing this, you become effortless. And the mind has lost control over you. It's lost its power over you. And now the mind now becomes a tool which you can use.
Yeah, so it's been interesting today since the seminar that I was thinking of all these things last night, but I've fairly effortlessly, of course Bruce helped me a little with editing, got one of my tasks done. And all the effort of thinking about getting this done was much more effort than the actual doing of it. And you spoke about that, about how actually things sort of effortlessly happen if you're not sort of caught up in the mind, and that's
right. So now you've experienced this, you know the truth of it.
Yeah.
And now it has to be practiced.
Right.
And the meditation puts you into the practice of that.
Yeah, it's been helpful in the last year that since you were the last few months when you were here last, that I've particularly practiced it when I'm going to bed at night, that I'm really turning my attention inward and away from my thoughts, and I've become pretty effective with that most of the time. Last night I was not so effective. But you also said today, which I thought was really helpful, something about the quality of the thoughts. There's something about the mind at night. What was it you said?
No, I said just like in meditation, a difficult meditation does not mean it's not a good meditation.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So when things are coming up and you're in turbulence at night, in this case, what you experienced last night, if you can just be aware of the turbulence, doesn't matter how great the turbulence is, if you can be aware of it, that's a good state. Or that's a good way of dealing with it.
Even if it might go on for hours.
Even then, if you can just remain aware of it and not be entangled in it, it's a good state.
So when we talk about the mind, the picture that comes to us is thinking. My thoughts are, compulsive, they're controlling me, whatever. But the way you describe mind is much broader than that, isn't it?
Yeah, we use mind in a general way to include thoughts, feelings, perceptions, which means pictures, sensations of smell, touch, taste, and so on. All of this is mental, in the sense these are experienced in consciousness, and it's mental. We are calling it mind, because you need to get free of all of these. You need to not only get free of your thoughts, but also of your feelings, of sensations, painful sensations, and so on, and pictures. So you need to get free of all of these. So we club them all together in a basket and call it mind. And the common factor is the I connects with all of these, because I think, I feel, I have sensations, I have pain, and so on. And so the I thought is the common root of all of these. So that's the structure of the mind. Peripherally, you have thoughts, feelings, sensations, pictures, and at the root, at the center, is the I that's projecting this or experiencing this.
But the I is the center of the story that we live with.
That's right.
From birth until death, and it's a very compelling drama.
Yeah.
It's more interesting than anything on the big screen because it preoccupies every moment.
That's right. So that answers the question: is what's the force of propulsion of the mind? It's the I. It's the I that wants to express and engage.
Yeah.
So so here's the predicament. That the I, has hijacked our life, in a sense. The I thought has...
Yeah, but with your willingness.
With our willingness.
We're going along with it.
You're happy for the hijacking.
So...
It's not against your will.
So to participate in meditation at all, whether witting or unwitting, we're wanting to undo the mind. Is that right?
Yeah, you want to undo the mind, but if you're willingly been hijacked, then you're not willing. You have to be tired of this hijack, of this lack of freedom, of this restriction, this limitation.
Exhaustion.
Which exhausts you, yeah. You have to be tired and fed up of this because it doesn't bring a lasting peace, it doesn't bring a lasting love or anything lasting. It has always the opposite. If you love, you hate, and so on. It has these opposites. And so at some stage you'd get tired of this limitation, and you'd want to get beyond it. That's when you're ready.
But it seems that we're also terrified at the prospect of letting go of the I.
Yeah, exactly. You're terrified because you lose control, you disappear, there's the unknown.
So stop right there, this word, you disappear.
You disappear because when you inquire into yourself with this question, who am I? The mind quietens. Okay? Finally, as you go deeper into it, if you're successful, the mind's completely gone. There's silence, which is the aim of this practice. There's only silence, there's nothing else, there's no universe, there's only the silence. But you're experiencing it. So in a way you're still there. And then at some moment, unexpectedly, if you're lucky, if you have grace, the I disappears and there's only silence, which means you are the silence. So that's what I mean by disappear.
So the question of control, and this became paramount in my life. When Karen had a terminal illness that appeared on the same afternoon that I lost my business and any source of income, and we had 4 mortgages at the same time, and all of a sudden I lost all ability to control the situation, not by choice. And so it was like learning to ride a surfboard on the biggest wave in Hawaii without any preparation. And I have to say that you were very encouraging in terms of that the whole universe is synchronous. Forget about synchronicity. The whole universe is synchronous. And so there's a trusting process in there. And so to get from our fear of loss of control to this place where we are able to sort of participate in this very responsive way to the unfoldment of life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So first of all, that was that unfortunate experience of having lost business and Karen's illness, this disastrous situation, this misfortune, first of all, was a fortune because you realize that you lost control, there is no control, which is really the truth. The idea that you have control and you can do things is an illusion of the mind, of the ego. In fact, there's no control on anything, everything just happening. So this misfortune put you into a situation where you had no control, everything was just happening, you had to just accept what was happening.
I went down fighting first. So.
Yeah, you went fighting, but that didn't help either.
No, it didn't.
It didn't help, so you just had to accept. You were forced to accept. In that sense, it was a great fortune that you were forced into this experience, which might otherwise take lifetimes to learn.
But it's not passive. Can you talk to
No, it's not passive. Well, it's passive, but it's not a dullness. It's not a resignation. It's an alertness. Because if you're resigned, then you're just being kicked around by your misfortune. But you want to survive, right? So you have to deal with this difficult situation. So you can't just be destroyed. You have to be alert and realize that you have to accept the situation. You're forced to accept it. There has to be an alertness in this.
Yeah.
So acceptance is an alert state. It's a passive alertness. It's passive but not dull. It's passive but alert. Passive in the sense that you're effortless, you're helpless. You're in a state of surrender. But you're conscious and you're alert in a state of surrender. That's where you begin to experience the forces that make things happen. Things start happening. But they're happening anyway, but you didn't realize it. Now you realize it actually, that things happen that way.
Yeah, it's the submission. You know, if you're going along at 30 miles an hour and all of a sudden in submission you're going 60 and 100 miles an hour, it's sort of a paradox in that way. That when you surrender, that you actually are operating at a much higher rate.
Well, not just higher rate, but also in a clearer way, a more effective way, more creative way, more with less loss of energy, more harmonious.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you know, less loss of energy, which implies resistance. And so, you know, used to say when we go to sleep at night, we're knocked out because, you know, finally the mind has to just, you know, give up. It's been, you know, struggling all day long. And so, and resistance is identification, which is this word that we use a lot in our meditation classes. And so can you say what is identifying with what?
Yeah, you could be identified with your thoughts, with your feelings, with people, with situations, with country, religion, with family, and so on. You can be identified with various things. So what's your question?
So
what is identification?
Yes, is it an emotional attraction?
Yeah,
Is
it's a connection between you and the thought, you and the person, you and your religion, and so on. It's the connection between you, which is the I, and the thought, the person, the religion. So that connection is called identification. Now, how would you know whether you're identified or not? If something happens that disturbs you in connection with the person that you're identified with, that's the proof that you're identified. If you were not identified, then you wouldn't be disturbed.
So
I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
If you weren't identified, something could be happening.
And you wouldn't be disturbed.
Like when I'm on the train, you know, sometimes people are acting out and, you know, yelling and doing things like that. But if I'm in sort of a awake state, then it doesn't disturb me at all.
Yeah. But if you were identified, you'd get upset.
Like if I'm identified that I want them to treat me in a certain way, or that they should behave in a certain way. Yeah.
If you have expectations come from identification. So identification produces expectation produces disappointment and entanglement. You see, and that's the proof that you're identified, because you're disturbed and entangled. But if you're not identified, you're not disturbed by what happens, and you're not entangled.
Yeah.
So that's the proof of identification. And your question of what makes the identification is the connection between the I connecting to the thought, the person, or the event, or the religion, and so on.
So the test, you know, in our midst right now of identification is what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
And it seems almost incomprehensible that you could not be identified. You know, they say that, you know, the planet, the number of species that are dying, the global warming, you know, the oceans are rising, crops are going to fail, millions of refugees, you know, democracies all around the world are eroding. And so what is the posture the posture that you find in yourself to deal with that?
Yeah. So now the world is in a crucial situation, I think like never before, where everyone is sort of disturbed by what's going on in politics, in environment, and so on. So everyone's disturbed, and everyone now has to wake up and try to understand what's going on in the world. You see? And now your question is, how can one possibly not be identified?
Let's, before we go there, I found that actually a staggering thought, that everyone is being forced to wake up at once now.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
I mean, not everyone is waking up, but they're being almost forced to wake up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have this beautiful condominium on Biscayne Bay in Miami, and all of a sudden the waters are starting to lap up onto your lawn. It gets your attention.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting that humanity, the wake-up call is ramping up in a way.
Yeah.
And so we can't really know how it's going to turn out.
No, but that's not the point. How it's going to turn out doesn't matter. How you are facing it and dealing with it matters. Now your question is, how could one possibly not be identified with a disturbed world? You see, if you're identified, the disturbance is going to drive you mad. I mean, people in an election, the person they voted for doesn't win, and people are broken, completely broken. Teachers are crying and in school because the person they voted for, you know who I mean.
Yes, we do.
So people
There
are
was a
crying.
depression in the country after
exactly.
the election.
Exactly. So well, in every country it's the same. You know, it's the same. Now, so then there's a financial crisis. Suddenly everyone's losing money. And there's epidemic and the environment and so on, the climate change and so on. Now, all of this, you have to know not what's going to happen in the end. That's not important. How are you going to deal with it now? Well, you're going crazy now. No? So you have to know how to deal with it. If you're identified, you're finished. You'll go crazy. If you're, I mean, people are actually going crazy. You know that, don't you? During the election and all.
Yeah.
So how not to be identified? That was your question. How can you not be identified?
Well, first the question was, what is identification?
Yeah.
And you say that there's this almost like an umbilical cord.
That's it. Now, how not to be identified? That is the practice of silence. Silence is the only state that's non-identified with anything. And you might ask, well, is that an escape then? No, it's not an escape, because you can practice silence and experience the world. So if you're in silence, which you learn in meditation, and then you come out in the world, but you remain in that state of silence, which is a self-awareness, if you can remain in that state, you're not identified with the world. The world is experienced as non-dual. Even though they're different forms and they're separate from you, you experience them as non-dual. And so there's no conflict, there's harmony. It doesn't matter what's going on. It doesn't matter who wins or doesn't win and whether there's a war or no war. It's experienced as non-dual. It's experienced as yourself, because the silence is a consciousness in which all this is happening. Silence, as I mentioned, is an infinite consciousness in which all these things all the world is happening. The universe has manifested from this force of silence, and it's happening now. So if you're in that state, you're not disturbed at all.
So are you saying...
It doesn't mean you don't care.
Right. It's not indifference.
Yeah, it's not indifference. No, you care. You have preferences, but you're not disturbed by anything.
But to not be disturbed, does that mean that you're seeing a certain harmony in the total picture of what's going on?
Yeah, that's it. You're seeing the whole. When you see a part of it, then you're not seeing the whole picture. So of course you'll be disturbed, because you're not seeing the truth. If you see the whole, for example, I'll give you a different example, your body. Your body is, the whole is your body, right? You don't say this finger is not mine, or this toe is not mine, or the nose is mine. Everything is yours, including the blood cells, including the bacteria in your body. And the white blood cells are fighting the bacteria. There's a war going on in your body.
A war.
There's a war going on. Actually, if you look under a microscope, there's these white blood cells are fighting with the bacteria and trying to dissolve them and eat them up and so on. There's a war going on inside you all the time. But it's all you, no? So you're not disturbed by it. So now the whole world is yourself. Now you can't think this, because then it's only a mental thought. But it's actually that. And you can only understand that in silence. And that's why we practice silence. I don't say all this, we just practice silence, and in the silence this understanding comes, that everything is manifest from silence, and silence is yourself. So how can you be disturbed? And everything yourself, so you're concerned about everything, but you're not disturbed. You might feel sad even if someone dies, a loved one dies, you'll feel sad, but you're not identified with the sadness, so it doesn't pull you down. You're aware of a sadness, you're aware of some tragedy that's happened, but it doesn't pull you down. You remain in your clarity, in your harmony, because you know the whole truth. You're seeing the whole picture.
So if you were to make a list of all the problems in your life, you know, it might be a very long list, or a very short list. Let's just say it's a very long list. How could you look at those from a different point of view?
You can look at them by not being in the mind. If the fact that you have a list of problems, it means you're looking at them from the mind. You're seeing them as the mind. Mind is the cause of all problems. Now if you get into silence, the list will still be there, but there's no problem.
They're just situations.
Exactly. You're free of them. It's just situations, and you have the energy to deal with them, the clarity and the energy to deal with them, because you're not wasted. Your energy is not wasted by the mind thinking it's a problem and struggling with it.
So it would seem to me that the actual work of meditation is looking at that list in a way.
That's right.
It's not crossing our legs and assuming a posture, but it's the power of that list of the problems. Whether it's the world or Donald Trump, or I have a medical situation or a financial situation, and to be able to look at those that list without reacting, without being in the mind, is that's where the work is.
That's meditation, and that takes you to silence, and that gives you the energy to deal with it, to dissolve it even.
So it paints a very different picture of meditation. Meditation actually being a dynamic attitude towards life, as opposed to, because we talk about pulling away from the world, but it's really more facing the world.
Of course. Of course. Not only facing the world, is absorbing the world into yourself. More than facing.
Say some more on that.
You see, with the mind, we experience the world as separate from ourselves. There are different forms. You are separate from me. I'm separate from the chair. I'm separate from the mountain, from the star, and so on. The separateness. In meditation, you begin to realize that these are all expressions of yourself. Silence is yourself. You've discovered in meditation, asking, who am I? That leads to an infinite silence. And that silence is a state of energy that manifests as the world. You experience that too, and I'll explain that. That manifests as the world, and so everything in the world is yourself. What was your question?
About facing the world.
Facing the world.
You say,
so
no, you have to absorb the world.
That's right. So everything is yourself. You absorb the world. Everything is included in silence, because silence is infinite. And time and space are not infinite. They're measurable, they're finite. But you've discovered an infiniteness that can absorb the finite time and space of the universe. So you've absorbed it all. You've not run away from it. You absorbed it, and it's intimate to you because it's yourself. Just as the white blood cell eating the bacteria, they both are intimate to you.
So I like the word intimate as opposed to absorb.
Okay.
I like the word also surrender. There's something about that word too, or embrace. It's sort of like embracing. You're not fighting it or something like that.
Yeah, embracing, but the
that's
word.
That's not quite the right word.
Eleanor used the word embrace.
That's
and
not
she said,
quite
once you understand this, then you embrace the world.
Oh,
it seems like
different.
a reaction.
Right, that's
that you
right.
go and start hugging everyone.
Yeah.
It's not that. You embrace the world, you may not make a movement even, and yet you've embraced the world. Because it's all yourself. No?
Right, right.
If it's all yourself, it's like a part of you.
Right.
And so it's the most intimate relationship that you have with the world. That the world or the universe is part of, it's yourself. So it's the most intimate, no?
So let's use that as sort of maybe a closing topic. This intimacy that deepens through the silence.
Yeah.
And could you say that in that we discover love as something that in an inseparable way?
Of course, that's the point. Now, so let's talk about that. You see, as long as there's the mind and there's duality, which is the world lives in duality, everyone in the world, and people talk of love, you know, I don't consider that love, because that's emotional love, which has the opposite of hate. The person that you love doesn't live up to your expectations or deceives you. The same love is converted to hate. You see, so what sort of love is that? Now compare that with this teachings in silence, in which through self-inquiry you discover the silence in which all duality disappears. There's only silence, and then from that silence you experience the world and realize it's all in the silence. That's infinite love, no? Because everything's come together. When two people come together, you call it love, right? What would you call it when the whole universe comes together into a oneness? Infinite love, right? So that's love. So silence is a state of love, if you want to put it, if that was your question.
Well, and that you said this process of not facing the world but absorbing the world, that it becomes increasingly intimate with the world, through the silence. That I think that's where we discover in silence that we are in love.
Exactly.
Despite what's going on.
Exactly. Silence is a state of love, and all this is happening in that love. So it's acceptable. And silence is not just love, it has many other descriptions or characteristics. For example, compassion, because everything is yourself. How can you not have compassion? So this compassion, infinite love, then beauty, to realize that all this universe has come from yourself. It's such a simple, I mean, you can't think this, but if you think, it's not true. But it is the truth. And so the truth of the universe being so simple that it's yourself, that it's such a simple idea or understanding that it's the most beautiful. There's beauty in its simplicity. You see, how can such a huge universe, such a multiple forms and multiple things going on, and for thousands of years going on, it all be yourself? The mind can't grasp that. But in silence you understand that. That's the point. That's the teachings in silence. What the mind cannot understand, the mind cannot comprehend it, is beyond the comprehension of the mind. But I'm saying this again. In silence you understand that the whole universe, from the time it was born, billions of years ago, is all in yourself, all created by yourself. Now such an understanding is beyond the mind, but you get that in silence. And that's the teachings in silence. And there cannot be a problem then. If that is understood, how could you have a problem when you know it was all created by you?
That's a wonderful note to end
Just one more thing. Just one more thing. We want to talk a little of the Big Bang.
Oh my goodness,
Just in brief.
Okay.
The Big Bang says, it's an expanding universe. Right. And they measure the rate of expansion. And they reverse this rate now, and they can tell you it started 30 billion years ago. Because it's expanding, if you go back 30 or 13, I'm not sure, go back, the universe contracts to a point. So the universe started from a point in which the Big Bang took place, and an expansion with gases and so on happened, and that created the universe and time. Now that point, before that point, scientists say nothing is known. It's the unknown. Okay? Now
Unmanifest.
Huh?
The
Unmanifest, yeah. That's the point we are going to when you do self-inquiry. Who am I? That's the point you're going to. And when I say that the mind becomes quiet and you experience a silence and there's an infiniteness, a timelessness, you've reached that point. You've reversed time so many billion years back. You've reversed it or dissolved it to that point where the universe began.
So that point is discoverable within yourself.
That's right. That's the I thought. That's the point. You see, so you're going back, that's where everything starts from. So self-inquiry brings you to that understanding. I mean, the Big Bang is a theoretical, it's theory. The scientists don't experience it. It's a calculation. From the expansion of the universe, they reverse the thing and they come to this conclusion. It's theoretical. Here you're experiencing it. Now this is again beyond the imagination of the mind or the understanding of the mind. But that is what teachings of silence is. To give you an understanding how the universe began and how it's related to you. And that it's from you that it expresses. When I say you, I don't mean Bruce Miller. I mean you. If you ask, who am I? It will take you to that point. But if you ask, who am I? It's not body and not mind. So you have to let go of Bruce Miller. But you have to go to the I that's experiencing Bruce Miller. Now if you take your attention to that direction in the form of an inquiry, it takes you to that point.
And when you say the word you, it's pointing to that point.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And that is self-inquiry and results in teachings which is in silence. Silence has all the teachings of the universe. All the information of the universe from the start is contained in silence.
Yeah, and I know that like in yoga, if you're doing a balance pose, they'll say, stare at a point. But what it's really doing is activating the point within ourselves. That point, we may not be aware of the point, but there is a point, which is our center. And so it was very appropriate to hear that from me. Karen, do you have anything else to say?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Bhagwan,
Thank you
for
so much.
joining us.
Welcome.
We're
Yeah.
always very grateful to make this
It's
journey.
been a wonderful
Welcome.
And we'll do it
seminar.
again in July.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
sure.
All right.
Every time, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bhagwan.
Okay. Good.